A few years ago, I had a dog-sitting business with regular clients. One of those regular clients was a lady with a big, nice house. There was a really long driveway leading up to the house, and it was tucked far back from the residential roads. It was somehow isolated while being in a dark residential neighborhood. No one could drive to the house without being noticed. No one could park on the adjacent streets, and it would be very unusual for anyone to be walking up to the house or through the yard without having already parked in the driveway. The last time my house dog sat there, everything began as usual. I fed the dogs, gave them their various meds, and played with them for a while watching movies. Best job ever. Eventually, I got sleepy and went to bed in the master bedroom, per orders. This room has huge, beautiful windows, with a view of the driveway, the only normal access point. I liked that about the room. After browsing on my phone in bed, I turned everything off and was trying to go to sleep. As I'm laying there, staring at the ceiling, deep in thought, I'm snapped to total awareness. Nothing changed. No one came up the driveway. Everything was silent, and yet, I suddenly started to feel very uneasy. The hair started to stand up on the back of my neck. A voice in my head was urgently stating, "You're being watched. You're being watched. Someone is watching you." My heart rate started to pick up. I've never experienced anything like this, and couldn't explain it in the least. I called my boyfriend immediately, grabbed my stuff, ran to my car, locked the doors, and sped out of that driveway. I glanced around the house while I was leaving and saw nothing. When I got home, I checked every door to make sure it was locked and slept on the couch with a view of both entry points. The paranoia slowly dissipated, and I was eventually able to sleep. The next day, I returned in the morning and took care of the dogs. Love, meds, potty, breakfast. I started walking through the house toward the back where the master bedroom is, and again started feeling really strange. Not a being watched feeling this time, but a high alert sense that things were off. I began to notice that candy wrappers were out that weren't there the night before. Doors were opened that I specifically closed to keep the dogs corralled. Things were moved. I left again and called my boyfriend to stay with me. I couldn't be there alone. Someone was absolutely in the house the night prior. I wondered if maybe someone in the family stopped by. But I always am, given a heads up with lots of warning before someone comes over. It's not too uncommon for the owner's son to stop by, but he has my number and also always gives me a heads up. I call the owner and tell her what I noticed. She tells me she'll call around and see if anyone had dropped by. She calls me back in under an hour and assures me that no one did. "It must be that old ghost," she says, and giggles. What a relief that she was taking my safety concerns so seriously. I tell her I'm having my boyfriend come over just to be cautious. She doesn't mind. A few hours later, my boyfriend and I get to the house. He checks the downstairs. Absolutely never am I to go upstairs, and everything is fine. We're hanging out for hours, playing with the dogs and watching movies. I left my boyfriend in the living room, walk past the front door, and go to the bathroom around 10 p.m. I'm about to walk out of the bathroom and the dogs start barking. As I'm walking back, I see my boyfriend is standing in the entryway by the living room. He's focused on the front door and tense like I've never seen him. Again, the hair stands up on the back of my neck. He quickly ducks to the side of the front door window. Before I can finish asking what's going on, he tells me, "Shh, someone's out there." He approaches the door and looks out, but the person was gone. I rush over to him and he explains that he was sitting on the floor in the living room when the dog started barking at the front door. My boyfriend goes over toward the door and sees a black figure, peeking into the window and then walk off. When I looked out, no one was there anymore. I was absolutely terrified, so I text the son to make sure, again, that it wasn't him. Short aside, a few weeks prior, he asked me to go to a wedding with him, and I gently replied, my boyfriend, who the son knew about, wouldn't think that was appropriate. So when I asked him if he had stopped by the house, he replied, "My girlfriend doesn't think it's appropriate that you're texting me so late." I apologized and told him I had a safety concern and it was important. I told him what my boyfriend saw. He simply responded that he didn't stop by. At that point, we were done for the night. We put the dogs in their kennels, waited a little bit, and ran to my car. The next day, I very quickly took care of the dogs in the morning and left before the owner got back. I've never felt such a deep, electric sense of imminent danger like I did that night in bed. That was just too much. When the owner asked me back a few months later, though I desperately needed the money, I politely declined. The night I almost killed a home intruder. My girlfriend and I were graduate students living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments. The whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had a laid-back bohemian vibe. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. It was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was past 3 a.m., and I had just finished a movie. I turned the TV off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm. The ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder, and it was freezing, scary cold. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend was always complaining about me forgetting to lock the door, and as was my habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed, and just as I was falling asleep, I thought I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. Moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking. Now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong. I told her I thought I heard something. Then we both heard what sounded like someone stumbling into our couch. We shot up and I yelled, "Is someone there?" No answer. The floor creaked again. This time, in unison, we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise. I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon. Nothing. Growing up, my dad always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting this practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time, from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if one of my buddies was playing a prank on me. That seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour, on a weeknight, and during a snowstorm. What I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in. My girlfriend yelled,
"Who's out there?"
More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to our bedroom. We heard the growl again, but this time it was followed by a gurgle. "It's Matt." We didn't know any Matts, at least not any that would enter our apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend. I'd never seen someone so scared. If worst came to worst, I thought to myself, I know I can outrun this bitch. I hoped it didn't come to that. "Matt who?" we shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over both of us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. I turned on the lights and walked into the family room. There he stood, a 6'2", slovenly-looking college kid. Matt was blacked out drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pre-game party at their apartment, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartment. Their door was locked, and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he had sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment he could find. I told him that he scared the shit out of us, and that he had to go. He stepped outside, and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, I learned that Matt froze to death. He'd been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean-to garage. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what happened to Matt. I do, however, remember being a little concerned for him after my nerves settled. The time a stranger broke into my house and knew my name. This happened when I was 14. I'm 17 now, and this still lingers in my memory. I was home alone that night, as my mom was working an overnight shift, and my older brother didn't live at home at the time, so therefore I had the house to myself. I'd say it was maybe 9 or 9:30 p.m., and I was in my room working on homework and listening to music with my headphones in, loud enough to where I really couldn't hear things. I remember for a fact that all of the doors were locked, and I stayed home alone pretty often, so I didn't have a reason to worry. Maybe an hour later, I decided to take my headphones out and take a break from homework. I heard noises in my kitchen and footsteps walking around downstairs, which was odd because my mom wasn't supposed to be home until 7 a.m. the next morning. But she could have taken an early night for whatever reason. But just to make sure, I locked my bedroom door and texted her, asking if she came home. It took her about 10 minutes to respond. But when she did, she said no. She was still at work, and why I asked. At that point, I was freaking out, because my mom and brother are the only ones with keys into the house. And myself, of course. So I decided to text my brother. Sure enough, he said no. He wasn't in the house, so I told both him and my mom about the situation. My brother wasn't far from the house, so he said he would be there soon and to call the cops. As I was trying to find a hiding spot in my room with my phone to call the police, I heard my name called from downstairs. That got me thinking, did whoever was in the house know me personally? A family friend maybe? I didn't respond out of fear of who knew my name and was calling it, and I didn't recognize the voice. I called the cops and was on the phone with them when my name was called again, followed by, "I know you're up there," and I heard someone starting to walk up the stairs. Again, I didn't respond, but I was pure terrified. The police assured me they were on the way and to stay put. I was still texting my brother while this was all happening. He informed me he was 5 minutes away. That's when I heard the front door slam. After I heard the door slam, about 5 minutes later, the police arrived and assured me it was them and that I could come out. Shortly after my brother arrived back home, the police looked around the property and all over the house, but there was no trace of whomever was once here. However, there was damage on the door and lock from being forged open and looked to be done by some sort of tool to pick the lock. Everything turned out okay, because nothing was taken, oddly enough. But the upsetting part is whomever was in my house wasn't found. From that night forward, though, we got cameras installed and got a better lock.